want some gossip.
Yeah, I
Well,
want some gossip.
so you're
of
talking
course.
about his second wife.
Yeah, so the first wife was a nice
she was a very
person.
sweet woman apparently, and she died very early. And in Poland, or at that court where he was,
Where he was
direction
in
of Poland. Yes, and then he returned without her. He wrote this beautiful poem for her.
Oh.
And then he married his second wife. Yeah, I'm not so interested in all these gossips, but as far as I recall, well, she had a problem with gambling or something.
And
there was always money and drinking. So he always he needed to earn a lot of money so she could spend it. And as far as I think at one moment he just kicked her out. He was the Goldesel for her. He was shipping the money. I mean, very interesting is this autodidact part of his life. Or when he was very young, he wanted to become a musician, but his mother didn't want that. Oh. She wanted him to study law.
Okay.
Which, of course, I mean, Bach let all his sons study law, but secretly he was making music the whole time.
Okay, so
and there were also there were also people who supported him and talked to his mother. Sooner or later, then finally he became a musician. He could play a hell of amount of instruments, apparently, like 20. I haven't heard how well, but okay, he started early apparently to teach himself all that. He was just very handy with music.
How do you think he accumulated his style? Is it
he was curious
traveling
enough.
And
yes,
he was
the traveling, and I think he was very curious.
Because he has very mixed style.
Yes, he's experimenting with all kind of different styles, much more than Bach in that sense. Yes, Telemann was much more composing in the taste of that time. Okay. Not that he didn't do his own crazy things and experiments, but he wrote music people like to listen to at that time, and it was this. I mean, they had listened to fugues and all this kind of stuff for a long time, and they were a bit tired of it. And now you have Bach, who's all about counterpoint, and he writes a sonata in super Berlin style in the musical offering, but still it's full of counterpoint. Bach, somehow my impression of Bach is he just had his idea about how things had to be and how they had to be perfect, and he took old forms which were completely out of fashion and perfectionized them. I don't know how consciously he did that. I think he just followed his vision. This is my impression when I look how he behaves. Telemann is a completely different person. He's very good at that, and it's for a long time people thought it's all bad music and so on, but it's not. It's very good music. It's just not. You don't find it 8-voice Hitchaka in such a perfect counterpoint. But it was not important for him. What for Telemann, other things were important, and his music is fantastic. And there's something on the radio, and you can hear it's Telemann. Yeah. He has a personal style, and actually it went so far that, for example, Johann Bernhard Bach, I had to do with his orchestra suites last week, and somebody writes in some dictionary, I don't know if it's Matheson or somebody says that, yeah, Johann Bernhard Bach also wrote a lot of orchestra suites in the Telemannish style. So Telemann was a trendsetter really. Well, Bach somehow not. Nowadays, I could imagine if they would both live nowadays, then Telemann would be the guy who would also make a YouTube video for his Instagram, Facebook, and his 100,000 social media things once per week, and he would very fast do all that. and Bach would sit at home and would not care much about it, and probably work on something else. Exactly. So Telemann was much more salesman. That of course changed during the 19th century, where Telemann where the musicology came up, and hence the Bach revival in Mendelssohn, then that Telemann was already long forgotten. We also need to know, of course, it was normal when composers died, like Buxtehude in Lübeck. He died, and what did they do with all the cantatas he wrote? They burned them in the oven when it was too cold in the church, because they had a new composer who wrote in the new fashion. I didn't want to listen to that anymore. And so it's, of course, if Telemann dies, after that is a complete. Who in Beethoven's time wanted to listen to a French overture with some gavottes and courants afterwards? No. To see what Telemann did in the last 10 years of his life, because he died very late, 1767. Mozart was 11 years old.
already. Yes.
So I don't know. Potentially he could have heard him. I've done an orchestra suite once from that time by Telemann. It's fantastic. It's it's not anymore Baroque music either. I mean, you hear there's somehow a Baroque composer, but he's doing some modern stuff and trying to go forward. So Ino, this cantata Ino,
yeah,
it's also from the last few years of Telemann. And that is basically almost, I mean, it's like a melodrama, which we have then with Benda, the Ariadne thing in the 70s. This whole idea, what do we do with a German text, which is so awfully singable in comparison to Italian with all the beautiful vowels, and we with all our and they were experimenting with these things. And if you see Ino, you have these accompagnato recits with painting the effects, and that is basically, that's already the first step to Ariadne. But this discussion goes on until Wagner. At the end of his life, he really already belongs to these. In Klopstock was in Hamburg, and these the Sturm und Drang poets and Empfindsamkeit and so on. And he was already, I mean, he was involved with these people, and they were talking about things which later are. It's the beginning of the Romantic almost. These I mean, Carl Philipp then later, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, and that time Gluck and so on. Telemann then died, but I mean, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach died 20 years later.
As we touched a bit of Carl Philipp and the time and going towards classical and romantic, can we now talk about come back to Fantasia and see what's happened to the genre at that time?
Yes.
Where do we find it? How did it evolve? How did it change?
It changes, especially